I think it's been a long time since we saw each other in person, and welcome to everyone who is joining us. Thank you for being here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can dive right in. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. This morning we're continuing to read from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 10, Chapter 2, Prayers of the Demigods or the Devatas to the child Krishna in the womb of Devaki. And today we're continuing where we left off from yesterday. Yesterday we read text 27. Today we'll read text 28. Tvam eka evasya sata prasutis tvam sanidhanam tvam anugrahascha tvam mayaya samvrita chetasastvam pashyanti nana navapaschitoye. Translation and purport by Srila Prabhupada. The efficient cause of this material world, manifested with its many varieties as the original tree, is you, O Lord. You are also the maintainer of this material world, and after annihilation, you are the one in whom everything is conserved. Those who are covered by your external energy cannot see you behind this manifestation, but theirs is not the vision of learned devotees. Reading from the purport now. Various demigods, beginning from Lord Brahma, Lord Shiva, and even Vishnu, are supposed to be the creator, maintainer, and annihilator of this material world, but actually they are not. The fact is that everything is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, manifested in varieties of energy. Ekam eva dvityam brahma. There is no second existence. Those who are truly vipaschit, learned, are those who have reached the platform of understanding and observing the Supreme Personality of Godhead in any condition of life. Premanjana churita bhakti vilochanena santah sadeva hridyeshu vilokayanti. This is from Brahma Samhita, verse 38. Learned devotees accept even conditions of distress as representing the presence of the Supreme Lord. When a devotee is in distress, he sees that the Lord has appeared as distress, just to relieve or purify the devotee from the contamination of the material world. We talked about this a little bit at the end of the session yesterday, if you were able to join us, that through the eyes of bhakti, we can transcend duality by seeing everything as a manifestation of the Lord. Everything is coming from the Lord. So the same point is being made here. When a devotee is in distress, he sees that the Lord has appeared as distress just to relieve or purify the devotee from the contamination of the material world. While one is within this material world, one is in various conditions, and therefore a devotee sees a condition of distress as but another feature of the Lord. Tatte nukampam susamikshamaanaha. Famous Bhagavatam verse 10:14-8. A devotee therefore regards distress as a great favor of the Lord because he understands he is being cleansed of contamination. Tesham aham samudharta mrityu sangsara sagarat. The appearance of distress is a negative process intended to give the devotee relief from this material world, which is called mrityu sangsara, or the constant repetition of birth and death. To save a surrendered soul from repeated birth and death, the Lord purifies him of contamination by offering him a little distress. This cannot be understood by the non-devotee, but a devotee can see this because he is vipaschit, or learned. A non-devotee therefore is perturbed in distress, but a devotee welcomes distress as another feature of the Lord. Sarvam kalvidam brahma. A devotee can actually see that there is only the Supreme Personality of Godhead and no second entity. Ekam eva dvityam. There is only the Lord who presents himself in different energies. Persons who are not in real knowledge think that Brahma is the creator, Vishnu the maintainer, and Shiva the annihilator, and that the different demigods are intended to fulfill different purposes, diverse purposes. Thus, they create diverse purposes and worship various demigods to have these purposes fulfilled. Kamais taister krita jnana prapadyante nya devataha. A devotee, however, knows that these various demigods are but different parts of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and that these parts need not be worshipped. As the Lord says in Bhagavad Gita 9:23, Ye pyanya devata bhakta yajante shradhayan vita te pimam eva konteya yajantya vidhi purvakam. Whatever a man may sacrifice to other gods, O son of Kunti, is really meant for me alone, but it is offered without true understanding. There is no need to worship the demigods, for this is avidhi, not in order. Simply by surrendering oneself at the lotus feet of Krishna, one can completely discharge one's duties. There is no need to worship various deities or demigods. These various divinities are observed by the mudhas, fools, who are bewildered by the three modes of material nature. Tribhir gunamayir bhaver ebhi sarvam idam jagat. Such fools cannot understand that the real source of everything is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Mohitam na bhijanati mam ebhya param avyayam. Not being disturbed by the Lord's various features, one should concentrate upon and worship the Supreme Lord. Mam ekam sharanam vraja. This should be the guiding principle of one's life. So the translation again, the efficient cause of this material world manifested with its many varieties as the original tree is you, O Lord. You are also the maintainer of this material world, and after annihilation, you are the one in whom everything is conserved. Those who are covered by your external energy cannot see you behind this manifestation, but theirs is not the vision of learned devotees. Om Agyantimirandhasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Pancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. If you were able to join us or watch the recording from yesterday's class, we discussed this analogy or this metaphor that the Bhagavatam gives for our embodied lives being like a great tree. So our bodies being like the tree, and so many different extensions going from number 1 all the way up to number 10, representing these different aspects of our bodies, our embodied existence. And we talked about how the key takeaway from that was really how wonderful is Krishna to give us these amazing, wonderful, complex bodies. But more importantly, how wonderful is Krishna to accompany us within this body where we are seated, just as two birds are seated. So these two birds we discussed are the birds of the Jivatma and the Paramatma, the individual soul and the super soul, or the supreme soul. So in today's verse, the prayer continues that actually, as this ever well-wishing friend who's seated beside us, who is with us at all times, who never abandons us, and who loves us more than we can ever fully comprehend, perhaps, Krishna is the one who is responsible for everything. He's the responsible for He's the one responsible for our creation. He's the one responsible for our maintenance. He's the one responsible for the necessary annihilation and destruction of things, which is inevitable in this material world. One who is very learned really understands and can appreciate that. So when we're in a space of knowledge, we can appreciate that. When we're not in a space of knowledge, which this purport of this verse really kind of focuses on, and which is what the focus of today's class will be, when we're not in knowledge, we can become bewildered. And in that bewilderment, we take a very different approach to our spiritual lives. Now, it's easy to look at a verse, and especially a purport like this one, and it's very tempting maybe to look at a purport like this one and think, okay, I know what this is about. I've heard this before. I get it. I've been around the block a couple of times. This is one of those purports that's just all about how wrong demigod worship is and how we shouldn't worship demigods. We should worship Krishna. And that's the end of the story. And in fact, we can even read perhaps a purport like this and sometimes get into a little bit of a subtle space of ego, where we think, well, I'm a devotee of Krishna, or at least I'm trying to be a devotee of Krishna. So I'm on the right path. I'm doing exactly what the scriptures advise us to do, or prescribe even us to do. And those other people out there somewhere, they're demigod worshipers, and they're to be condemned. And so, this purport is just, it's all about how great we are, and how worthy of condemnation these other demigod worshipers somewhere out there are. And so we can read this purport and end up in a space of like us versus them. We can actually end up, I want to challenge us today to think about this. I think we can end up very much in a place of sectarianism and a place of ego, a place that is fundamentally perhaps incompatible with the mood that we learn about as being the mood of a Vaishnava that we're to aspire towards, right? A Vaishnava is one who respects and honors all, amani namana dena. And yet sometimes we can, even in the name of bhakti, or using kind of misappropriating purports and language like this, and even some of the verses from the Gita and Bhagavatam, we can make it all about, we are right. Our deity is the right one to worship. Your deity is the wrong one to worship. We're right, you're wrong. We're better, you're worse. We're higher, you're lower, right? We can get into this very hierarchical way of thinking. And we wouldn't be entirely incorrect, right? Because the Bhagavatam itself, in some ways, is a very confronting text. It's a very strong text, right? Right from the beginning, right from its thesis statement, asserting that Krishna is Swayam Bhagavan. Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead in a way, with a kind of a completeness that not even, what to speak of, jivatmas, empowered jivatmas, but even other forms and avatars and expansions of the Lord aren't even at that level. So the Bhagavatam does kind of present a little bit of a hierarchy. So we're not entirely incorrect in reading a purport like this in that very hierarchical way. But I want to suggest that's just a part of the picture. That's just one way of looking at it. But there's more to that picture. And if we can open ourselves up to it, there is a way to look at this purport and the very strong lessons that are being taught here, and the many verses that Srila Prabhupada is citing, particularly 2 in the 7th chapter of the Gita and the 9th chapter of the Gita, that make very strong statements about the worship of other deities. If we can open ourselves up to the possibility, there's really powerful lessons for us to learn and to apply in our own practice of bhakti. there's another way of looking at this idea. So what I'd like to do for our time together this morning is to really kind of dive into this way of looking at what is actually going on when scripture, like the Gita or like the Bhagavatam, and when great acharyas like Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur or our own Srila Prabhupada, when they speak very strongly about the dangers of demigod worship. So the first thing I want to just point out or bring us to, because sometimes the language can be a little tricky, is when often we find, and it happens here too, that when Srila Prabhupada refers to demigod worship, he's offering a kind of an English translation, a kind of an easy, accessible phrase to translate a concept and a phrase in Sanskrit that's called Anya Devata Puja. And we see this phrase, Anya Devata Puja, come up a lot in different forms. Here, one of the places Srila Prabhupada quotes from is from the 7th chapter. This is verse 720. And here it's in a slightly different form. It's Prapadyante Nya Devata, or Prapadyante Anya Devataha. So similar idea, Anya Devata Puja. So let's try to break this phrase down, and maybe that'll give us some insight. And then we can kind of talk about what might be going on with the critique of Anya Devata Puja. Why is it such a problem and something to be aware of? So Anya means other. It's usually translated as other. Sometimes we might also translate it as another, like the English word another. I'm not a linguist, but there may be a kind of a connection between anyata and another. But it's a similar kind of idea. Anya means other. It also has this connotation, or in context, it can also mean several others. So anya kind of can also imply a multiplicity, or it can imply a kind of a generic, like any other. So that's anya. Devata is an interesting word. Devata, in its most literal sense, simply means a divinity or a god, we might say. In context, usually it refers to, and the way Srila Prabhupada often will translate Devata, is a kind of a lesser deity. And Srila Prabhupada will use this word demigod. Now, what's interesting is if you look up demigod in the dictionary today, like a modern dictionary, the primary definition of demigod is a little bit different. The primary definition of demigod, at least in American English, is a person or a being that is the child of a god and a mortal or a human. So by that definition, the Pandavas, for instance, would be accurate to call them demigods. But there's a secondary definition that you'll find, and that is a little bit more of the older Victorian English definition, which it seems that Prabhupada was invoking when he would use the word demigod, and that is a lesser deity. So that's the sense in which Prabhupada, will often refer to Devata. And we see that in this purport. Prabhupada will go back and forth between saying demigods, other gods. Sometimes he says, like in one place, he says, there's no need to worship various deities or demigods. So another synonym for Devata is deity, not in the sense of, as we use it in ISKCON colloquially, the deities on the altar, but any object of worship that is understood to be divine, we can say is a devata. So anya devata, other deities, other divinities. And then puja means worship. Here there's a connotation that puja refers not just to worship in general, but also specifically to worship in the sense of petitioning. So there's a kind of a worship where we go before the object of worship with a petition or an appeal, a request for a boon, for a benediction, for a blessing, a request for protection, right? We see this within Vaishnava prayers all the time. There's different kinds of prayers. There's different kinds of worship. And one of the things, for instance, on Sunday, there's going to be an amazing event called the Global Puja for Ukraine, organized by Sachinandan Swami and some friends, where we will worship Nrsingadev through the medium of three powerful deities, or we'll worship three powerful deities, one in Hobalam in India, one in Simhachalam Farm in Germany, and then in New Vrindavan, the Nrsingadev deity in New Vrindavan. And we'll offer these pujas, petitioning the Lord for his protection, particularly for those who are in a very vulnerable condition, who are suffering, all the devotees and really all the people in these conflict areas of Ukraine. So that's an example of a puja where we're petitioning. So Anya Devata Puja, thank you for putting the link. Someone put the link there. Thank you. So Anya Devata Puja refers to when we approach other deities, right? Deities other than Krishna. When we approach perhaps multiple other deities and divinities to petition them for something. Now, what's interesting is when the Shastra speaks out against Anya Devata Puja or critiques Anya Devata Puja, and when Srila Prabhupada critiques it, sometimes we may superficially think that they are critiquing the devatas themselves. But actually, if you look at the critique a little bit more deeply, as I hope we can, you'll see they actually rarely, if ever, are denigrating in any way the devatas themselves. And it wouldn't make any sense to us. Srila Prabhupada says in this purport, through one understanding, we can understand that these devatas, these gods and goddesses, these divinities, are at the very least empowered beings, empowered servants of Krishna. But as Srila Prabhupada says in this purport, we can also understand that in a sense, he writes, a devotee knows that these various demigods are but different parts. So you'll often say this word anga, limb, parts of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So the critique is not of the devatas themselves. That would be absurd. That wouldn't be compatible with the vision of bhakti, of Krishna consciousness. In fact, Srila Prabhupada, in I think it was probably 1969, on one of his early visits to England, his disciple Shyamasundar Prabhu and Malati Devi and others arranged a speaking engagement for him at a local Hindu center that had given a lot of support. The Hindu community was quite established in the UK in a way that they weren't yet in the US. So there was a lot more, ethnic Indian British families and Hindu temples, and some of these centers and communities gave a great deal of support to the devotees, and they were very eager to receive Srila Prabhupada. But they were also a little concerned and disturbed because they had started hearing from some of the early devotees some criticisms of the various devatas. And so they asked Srila Prabhupada to clarify this. And Srila Prabhupada spoke that a Vaishnava respects every living being. He said a Vaishnava respects even an ant. So what to speak of the devatas? That was Prabhupada's approach. But then he went on to speak, as we will, about how to properly honor the devatas by taking shelter of Krishna. So the critique is not of the devatas themselves. It's not meant to put down, to denigrate, to condemn the devatas, or even really to condemn their devotees, we can say. But it is to correct a kind of a fundamental disconnect that, if left unchecked, can be very dangerous. So let's get into that. What is the danger that Krishna is trying to warn us against? Or what are the dangers? And I want to identify a couple of them, kind of just touch on them. We won't have time to go so much into detail. But when Krishna, as we see in this Gita verse in the 7th chapter, and then later in the 9th chapter as well, when Krishna points out, when he talks about Anya Devata Puja, what else does he say about it? So he says, prapadyante anya devataha. They surrender or they worship other gods or other demigods. So who is the they that he's talking about? What is the quality that he's talking about? He says, Kam est tais ter hrita jnanaha. So hrita jnanaha is a very interesting phrase. Jnana means knowledge, and hrita means stolen or taken away, like forcibly taken away, robbed or stolen. Or it might, another way of translating hrita is when something is kind of pulled away, it's snatched away. So very strong phrase, hrita jnana, one whose knowledge is stolen away, is as if like teared away, right? So teared away, stolen away by what or by whom? Now it's interesting, he doesn't say by the allure of these different personalities or these different divinities. There's a very specific reason or specific source of that knowledge being stolen. And he says what it is. Kames taister. Kama here means desire. Sometimes we translate it as lust or cravings, but we can also broaden that out to just sort of desire in general. Like we were talking yesterday about that Jivatma bird in the tree. What is that bird doing? I hope everyone remembers. That bird is constantly seeking for those sweet fruits and trying to avoid the bitter fruits, right? So what is this? This is a manifestation, as we talked about yesterday, of desire, right? Attachment, aversion, happiness, distress, all these dualities are born of desire. So when that Jivatma bird has that desire, and that desire for what? Desire for teister. Teister is like, it's a repetition of this word tehi, which te means, it just kind of means this. So when you have like, when you say te or teister in Sanskrit, because of the, anyway, it gets modified when the two words are next to each other, but it's the same word. So it's kind of like saying, desire for this and that. But the fact that it's repeated implies when there's like a sort of multiple desires, when our intelligence, like Krishna talks about the intelligence as either being very focused and one-pointed, vyavasatmaka buddhir eke hakurunandana, or being bahushaka, being kind of all over the place, multi-branched. When our desire is like that, our intelligence becomes multi-splayed, multi-branched. We're kind of all over the place. This desire, this, that. And that kama, and that, kama for this and kama for that, that fixation on those sweet and bitter fruits, that impels us. It steals away our knowledge. And then rather than notice our dear friend who's taking care of us and who's with us and accompanying us all the time, we try to get a quick fix solution. And what is that quick fix solution? Anya Devata Puja. So Ananda Bihari put some pressure on me. He says I'm the king of analogies. So I feel like I need to offer some analogies. So let me offer one analogy here, and it's a bit of a crude one. But imagine you're like really hungry. You're really, really hungry. And maybe, you're on your way to a meal, but you just feel like, oh, I'm so hungry. I just want to eat now. I can't wait. And you see a vending machine, right? We all know sort of with our intelligence, vending machines, they're totally overpriced. It's full of junk usually, right? All these good reasons not to use a vending machine. But in that moment, you're so hungry, you go to the vending machine and you think, okay, I've got it. This is my solution here. And so what do? Well, you have to do a couple of things, right? You take out your dollar bill and then it's all wrinkly. So you have to straighten it out and you have to make sure you insert it properly. And if it's not inserted properly, or if it's bent, it'll spit it back out, right? So there's a process. So similarly, again, this is a crude analogy, but similarly, when we're so overtaken by desire that we want that quick fix solution, okay, there's a kind of a cosmic vending machine. There's a solution, there's a system. There's this opportunity to offer puja, which is, in one sense, very, it can be looked at as a very mechanical process. Just like putting the money in the vending machine, we can offer certain prayers or certain rituals. Just like that dollar bill needs to be crisp and, not bent. If you take these rituals seriously, you have to pronounce things correctly. For instance, you have to know the proper mantras. If you make a mistake in the vending machine, let's say you want a little bag of greasy chips and they're, located at B7, but accidentally your finger slips and you hit B8 instead. You won't get the chips. You'll get something else. You'll get the granola bar that's there, and you didn't want the granola bar, right? So you can't do anything about it because there's a mechanical process. So similarly, again, it's just an analogy. I know there's differences here as well, but we can kind of think about it or kind of analogize this approach to puja of various divinities who are tailor fit to give us these different things, right? Because that's what they're empowered to do. That's their sort of occupation, you can say, by the arrangement of Krishna. It can become like a very mechanical process like that. And there are all these stories, for instance, this is a bit of a tangent, but there are all these stories that you find in the Puranas and in the Mahabharata and Ramayana and traditions and of Vedic storytelling, where someone asks for something and makes a mistake or is tricked into making a mistake. And the results are, sometimes like the opposite of what they wanted. The famous examples of Kumbhakarna in the Ramayana. Kumbhakarna was a powerful warrior, and he performed some austerity and performed, I think, a grand yajna, a great puja to petition Lord Brahma for a boon. He wanted, the boon he wanted was Indra Asana. Indra Asana means the seat, the asana of Indra. In other words, he wanted to rule the heavens. But somehow or other, he either made a mistake, or Saraswati Ma tricked him into a mistake, or somehow by the Lord's arrangement, instead of Indra Asana, he said Nidra Asana, which is a Sanskrit term for a bed, the seat of sleep. And so as a result, Kumbhakarna sleeps for, half the year, right? So it can backfire on us. Or even if it doesn't backfire on us and we get what we want, it is very much a transaction. And so the danger that Krishna is trying to alert us to, because Krishna loves us so much and wants what's best for us so much. He's that patient bird waiting for us to turn. He's that patient friend who's just singing that song, playing that flute song, saying, "Wake up, my dear friend, I'm here for you. I love you." He loves us so much. He doesn't want us to be misled, and he doesn't want us to risk the danger of falling into this mechanical transactional mood, right? So the real critique of Anya Devata Puja, in one sense, is the mood that underlies it. This mood of transaction. When you get those chips from the vending machine, do we say thank you? Do we embrace the vending machine out of joy? Do we feel closer to the vending machine? No, of course not. Because we recognize it's a mechanical process, it's just a machine that gives us what we want. And in fact, when we don't get the chips from the machine, let's say you do everything properly, you even put in B7, and somehow or other, the chips get stuck in the machine and they don't come out. What do we do? Does anyone want to unmute or put in the chat box? You want to confess to having done this?
We get angry and frustrated.
And hit the machine.
Hack the vending machine.
We hit it. We kick it. We get angry. We get frustrated. We curse at it. We forget all our good manners. And we feel totally justified in doing it because I put in my money. I put the right, I did everything right. Why are these chips not coming to me? It's not fair, right? So instead of gratitude, we feel even a sense of entitlement, and we can even become sort of give in to our lower tendencies. Now, contrast that with going to your best friend's house. Before we move on, just imagine going to your best friend's house. You're hungry as anything, and you go to your best friend's house, and you go, and your dear friend offers you a meal. Right? Not only is your hunger satisfied, but think about that experience, what it's like. It doesn't evoke or awaken that same feeling of entitlement or of transaction. Instead, it softens the heart. It awakens in the heart deep feelings of gratitude, of love, of appreciation. It brings us closer to our friend. We feel now our relationship has become even more intimate. And in fact, the deeper that relationship goes, you may go to your friend's house and you may be hungry, and your friend just has nothing to offer you but the same bag of greasy chips that you would get from the vending machine. But I promise you, those chips will taste different. The experience will be completely different because the experience is on the level of the heart. And so Krishna, in his great love for us, he doesn't want our hearts to be hardened and us to become entitled and ungrateful. He wants that wonderful seed of gratitude to be planted in a very soft, pliable, fertile soil of the heart so that it blossoms into our own love, our own bhakti for him. So this is the danger that Krishna is so mercifully protecting us from, this danger of transaction. Now let's kind of look at this from another angle. Let's say, taking the same vending machine example, that not only do we kind of become a little bit entitled and ungrateful, but now we start to develop this really bad habit of every time we're hungry, instead of actually looking for a nourishing meal, we just try to quench that hunger with these bags of greasy chips and, other junk food, right? We just eat a candy bar or something like that. That it becomes a habit. And pretty soon we're going from vending machine to vending machine. Oh, this vending machine, this one doesn't give me as, this vending machine doesn't have as many choices of candy bars. So I'm going to go to this one now. Right. And because it's mechanical anyway, there's no problem in that. We just kind of treat it as whatever is best for me, whatever's in it for me. So we can become habituated to that kind of mentality. We can start to apply that into everything. We become impatient. We become kind of addicted to that which is maybe pleasurable, but not so good for us. We can even become bewildered by choice, because now we do this so much that I don't know which vending machine to go to. I can't choose between them. Or when I go to the vending machine, I know I'm killing this analogy, but Ananda Vihari asked for it, so be careful what you ask for. We can stand in front of a vending machine and get so bewildered. There's so many choices. There's so many different kinds of candy bars and chips and drinks and, ice cream and this and that I just stand there for like an hour trying to decide. And in that hour, I could have easily, gone and cooked a wonderful meal, or gone to a friend's house, or gone to the temple. I could have done so many things, but instead I'm paralyzed by this choice, right? So another danger that Krishna is pointing out or helping us to recognize is we can become like that, where we just jump from thing to thing. In another analogy or another example, I work in a college, as many of you know, and really brilliant students, but sometimes even at the best colleges and universities, you see some of these students, they become so bewildered and so almost like captivated by their own uncertainty and their own inner doubt that they can't figure out what to do. So they just keep jumping from thing to thing, right? I know of students who keep changing their majors. So I'm a biology major for some time, and then, oh, no, maybe I should study comparative literature. And then, okay, well, half those credits I lost, so I have to kind of start over again. So, okay, I'll do that. No, but actually, maybe really I'm, computer science, that's the field that's much more practical, and, I can earn lots of money, and I think I'm pretty good with computer. So I lose some more credits. And like that, sometimes students actually, some of you may know or may have personally experienced something like this, where some people actually they can end up so mentally unstable and emotionally unstable that they're like unable to graduate, right? This is actually a real problem in some places, where students, they stay perpetual students because they're just too afraid to face the real world and to graduate. And so like that, sometimes we can jump from thing to thing, from sort of, puja to puja, from practice to practice, without going very deep, without actually making a commitment in any one place. We can take things very cheaply and superficially. So before we move on, we have a little bit of time left. Before we move on, I want to just invite us to reflect, even if, the literal worship of devatas and performance of puja is maybe not something that, is a part of our practice or our history or our culture. let us not think that these lessons don't apply to us. Let's honestly reflect. What is our vending machine, that subtly shows up in our own practice of bhakti? In what ways are we jumping from Anya Devata Puja to Anya Devata Puja? In what way are we unwilling to commit and go deep, right? Because these are real issues that we actually face, that we often sort of bury under, we bury deep within, and we don't like to think of ourselves as doing this demigod worship or this Anya Devata Puja, but in reality, in a subtle way, we can actually be doing it as well. Now, as we move towards our conclusion, and I do want to leave a little bit of time at least for some discussion or some questions, there is a deeper way of understanding what Krishna is really warning us against. There's a deeper danger. And it brings us more to the heart of Krishna. I know it's presumptuous of me to speak of the heart of Krishna, but I'm just trying to, in some way, maybe spark some thought or some reflection on this. The greater danger is that in this process, we can actually become more and more disconnected from our real relationship with Krishna. And we forget that Krishna, as Srila Prabhupada points out so powerfully in this purport, it's such a great purport in this respect, that Krishna is actually the source of everything, including even the little bags of chips, right? Again, to really butcher this analogy, right? Someone is filling those vending machines. And when we're so transactional that we forget that, we just think it's between me and the machine, and I do my thing and I get up. But someone is filling those machines, that even those chips, even those candy bars, what to speak of the real nourishing meals that await us. But even those things are coming from somewhere. But when we get locked into the transactional, habitual, jumping, superficial approach of Anya Devata Puja, our vision is eclipsed from seeing that bigger picture, from seeing that source. So another analogy, this is a bit of a weird one. Imagine that there is, for instance, like a really wealthy parent, let's say like a Bill Gates or a Jeff Bezos or someone like that. I don't know, those are maybe not such nice comparisons, but someone who's just very much an affluent parent, who has a lot of power and wealth, but who also has a child maybe who is in need of some extra discipline and some extra guidance. Maybe this child is somehow estranged from the parent. And so what might the parent do? The parent might employ a whole staff of people to help, right? A nanny, a tutor, maybe several tutors, someone to watch over the child, someone to actually maybe even discipline the child in a way that the child can actually hear it, because maybe the child is not, for whatever reason, hearing it from the parent. And that's part of the parent showing their love for the child, right? That they've engaged these people who are at the parent's service, at the wealthy man's service, and who are performing that service on behalf of the wealthy man as an extension of the wealthy man's love for his child. But what if that child, now it's natural that child, especially initially, especially as a young child, will more or less focus on those people, right? And what to do to please those people, so that the child learns, okay, if I say flattering things to my nanny, and I know her buttons to push to make sure that she gives me an extra treat, or gives me 20 more minutes of screen time on the iPad, or whatever the child wants. So the child can maybe learn to manipulate a little bit, or that the child can even learn to fear some of these personalities, right? That, if I don't do what I'm supposed to, then such and such person will punish me. But the child, that's natural as a child, when the child is very young. But as a child gets older, the hope is that with maturity, the child is able to see that, actually, all of these people are just part of my father's parenting of me, and that the rewards and the consequences and the discipline and the treats and everything is actually coming from my father. And in fact, my father is there and waiting for me to have a relationship with him that goes much farther and beyond what any of these other people do in their roles, right? So that's how it's naturally supposed to happen with maturity. But the danger is if that child is unable to make that connection, then that child becomes so fixated that they forget about the father altogether. They can actually become even more estranged or alienated from the father in this example. I know it's not exactly like this with Krishna. Krishna is not an aloof father. But in our ignorance and in our very myopic, tiny vision that's so colored by our own desires and our own distortions of reality, we may actually erroneously conclude that, Krishna is not in the picture. What do I need to have a relationship with Krishna for? And that is heartbreaking for Krishna, not because Krishna is a territorial, jealous, insecure God, right? And this is a really important point. I know we're getting close to the end time here, but this is a really important point. Krishna, it's not that Krishna is in any way insecure or, right, will he's competing with these other these other devatas, and it's it's coming from that's often how it feels for us when we're competing with someone, when we have a rival, when we have insecurity, when I think, oh no, Gail always says how much she likes my classes, but I heard her complimenting someone else's class the other day, so now I feel insecure about that. It's not like that. Krishna's not insecure like that. It's out of his love for us that he wants us to have that deep, meaningful, mature relationship with him that goes beyond, just rewards and punishment, that goes beyond good and bad karma, that goes beyond the transactional, that gets into the heart-to-heart connection. And he knows that if we're not careful, we can cheat ourselves out of that, and he won't let us do it. He doesn't. That's the one thing that breaks his heart, that causes him to intervene, even that causes him to speak so strongly in the Gita and in the Bhagavatam and in so many other places. Out of his love, he speaks so strongly even to keep us from even subtly going down that road. Let me just close with, it's very interesting, when Krishna makes these very strong points about the dangers of Anya Devata Puja, he doesn't just leave us hanging. He doesn't just say, don't do this. Rather, he gives us a radical, heart-transforming alternative. In the 9th chapter, in that same section where he's speaking about Anya Devata Puja, actually just the neighboring verse to the verse that Srila Prabhupada quotes in this purport about how he is supplying everything, there's no need to worship the demigods. There's this very beautiful, beloved verse, one of my favorite verses, 9:22, Krishna says, Ananyas chintayanto mam ye jana paripashate desham nitya bhayuktanam yogakshemam vahamyaham. You can hear it in the language. Instead of Anya Devata Puja, Krishna says Ananyas chintayanto mam. Same word. Now it's the reverse meaning. Ananyas means without any other, exclusive. There's an exclusivity to love that Krishna wants, not an exclusivity that's out of ego or out of competition or any of these things that we often associate exclusivity, but an exclusivity of love, right? A faithfulness, a chastity, a connection, that a feeling that says, I don't need to give my heart to anyone else. My heart is to you, my beloved, and no one else. I have eyes only for you. Ananyas chintayanto mam. Krishna is saying, please, my dear, my dear beloved, my lovebird sitting on this tree branch with me, just give me your heart in this way. Ananyas chintayanto mam. Give me your mind, your attention, your awareness, your consciousness. Don't be distracted and diverted and pulled this way or that by others. Ananyas. And Krishna is so compassionate and so unbelievably loving that he asks one thing of us, Ananyas chintayanto mam, and he gives us two things in return. He says, I promise you that not only will I protect or maintain what you already have, kshema, but I will vahamyaham, I will personally carry whatever you lack. So you may think out of fear You may think, I need to hedge my bet. So I'll worship you, Krishna, but I'll also do this little puja on the side here, and I'll do this, and I'll get into that, and I'll dabble in this. Because after all, better I just cover my bases. But Krishna says you don't need to do that, because that mentality that's born out of fear, that will separate us. But when you trust in me completely, I'm there for you completely, 108%. That is what's awaiting us. That is the kind of ever well-wishing, dearest, best of friends that is waiting for us to turn to him on that tree of life. So thank you so much. I'll close there. We have just a few minutes left until our hardish stop at 8. So I'll open it up to some questions, comments, reflections.
Thank you, Venkata Prabhu. We know you have to make a hardish stop because you have to deal with your bewildered by choice students. There's a very intelligent comment in the chat. Hemangi says, my understanding was that the staunch devotees of demigods are gradually directed to Krishna, as even demigods won their pure bhaktas to get Lord's mercy. What do you say to that?
Yeah, it's a great point. I really appreciate this point. That is definitely true. And that is my understanding as well. And I think, again, it's a beautiful point because it helps us to, rather than see through the eyes of kind of sectarianism and self-righteousness and superiority complexes, we can actually appreciate as Hemangi, as you're saying, the staunch devotees of the Devatas. That is true. And at the same time, because of the nature of Anya Devata Puja and the things that I've tried to just, shed some light on or plant some food for thought for you, because of that nature, there's a danger that in the name of approaching the Devatas, especially when there's this Anya, this multiplicity of going from this puja to that puja, we can even subtly fall prey to these dangers. It's definitely possible for someone to be, as you say, a staunch devotee or a very heartfelt, sincere devotee of a devata, not in the mood of what we've talked about, not in this kind of, very desire-fueled, what's in it for me type of mood. But it's also, it's a rarer thing and it's more dangerous. So those cases are there, but from what I understand, they're more of the exception than the norm. I see Nityananda Chandra Prabhu, you have your hand up. Is it on this point or something similar, maybe?
It's just in support of what you were saying earlier. Krishna follows that 7th chapter verse saying, so for those who have that kind of transactional mood, I supply the faith in the demigods. I'm even making them the devotees of the demigods. I'm giving them their faith in the demigods. And then the next verse he says, and then I give the result too.
Yeah.
I make sure they get what they're looking for too.
Yeah. And Hemangi, to your point, I mean, the understanding is, yes, hopefully gradually, just as I tried to give that example of a child, right? A child gradually comes to a more mature understanding. So hopefully gradually, this point that Krishna makes in the Gita and that Nityananda Prabhu is sharing with us, that starts to awaken in that devotee's heart, that devotee of the Devata, that they say, hey, wait a second, I'm getting these results. So really, who is the we didn't talk about it so much here, but who is the sort of the power behind the power? And there's so many references to this in the various Upanishads, for instance, even going back, where these devatas are discussed, and there's this idea of who is the the Agni of Agni, who is the Surya of Surya, who is the Vayu of Vayu, who is the Indra of Indra, who is the one that's supplying the power to those devatas, who is supplying the faith to the devotees, and who is supplying the results. We get inquisitive to that, and then, as you say, gradually we can be directed to Krishna. Yeah, Nityananda Chandra, did you have more to add?
There's a progression that Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur talks about. He says that the person worships the various demigods to get something in this life because they heard it from various sages and sastra. but then they hear more, and then they hear more, and they realize, oh, there's something I can get in my next life. And they'll do a bigger puja, bigger ceremony, so I can become Indra. But then they hear more, and they hear, wait, Indra has problems. He sometimes runs into difficulty, and so they progress to the next stage. We're like, well, I want moksha now. I don't want to get the. And then they hear more, they hear more, they hear more, and it comes all the way to bhakti.
Beautiful. I love that understanding. Thank you for sharing that.
The highest benefit won't be there, and they won't be satisfied. Ahaitukya pratiyata, unceasing, unmotivated devotional service to Krishna is the only thing that satisfies the self. And in the context of this Ukraine puj, what the Shishekabu was explaining, that the intention is that Lord Nrsingadev will protect the devotees from looking for the wrong thing. Just like when Jesus came, people thought, oh, he's going to come and he's going to wipe out the Roman Empire. And he said, no, my kingdom is not of this world. He was talking about a revolution of consciousness, not a political revolution, not a military revolution, not an economic revolution, not changing the situation, but let's change our consciousness, that service to Krishna, everything else will be there.
Beautiful. Thank you. Yeah. Just reflecting on Adi Purush Prabhu's point here, something I neglected to say, but a very important insight. Just go back to that analogy of the vending machine and the little bag of chips and feeling hungry. When Krishna satisfies our hunger, he simultaneously, satisfies the immediate need, but also the real thing is satisfies that deeper need. So when we're like in that analogy, what we're really looking for, that kind of satisfaction and nourishment that we're looking for, we'll never really get from the bag of chips. The bag of chips just kind of quiets the rumble of the stomach, as they say, for a little while. So in that analogy, turning to Krishna, particularly as we aspire to, in this unconditional Ahaitukya apratihata mood that Adi Purush Prabhu is sharing with us, then the real treasure, the real nourishment we can access, that goes far beyond, that satisfies our immediate hunger, but actually goes much deeper and satisfies us on the permanent, eternal level. Thank you. Yeah. I think we might be at the end of time. I don't know if someone has a quick question or comment. I can hang back for another minute or two. Or I think that's the sign. Okay, Krishna wants us to end. Thank you all so much. I so much appreciate this opportunity, and just so grateful for your Sangha and for this opportunity to share and discuss Bhagavatam. Grantara Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Venkata Bhatta Prabhu and his analogies ki jai. Venkata Bhatta Prabhu, you're the best. Thank you very much. Akiko-chan, seeing you. Okay, who else is here? Come on, turn the cameras on. Want to say hello? Even Bhima Prabhu is keeping his camera. Bhima Prabhu, are you showering or what? Hemangi, beautiful comment, Hemangi. Very intelligent. Okay, yeah. All right, thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful day. Don't hit your vending machine. Remember who is filling it and get promoted to the soul. The Bhatta Prabhu is okay. Hare Krishna.